We have a very close partnership with the EU and India in developing the electronic waste rule in India here. We had a lot discussion at that time, or the Indian colleagues had a lot of discussion with the EU. Now in the next 15 minutes, first of all, learn a little bit more what does it mean when we talk at the moment about EPR, e-waste and plastic waste in India. And it's so that we have a kind of state-of-the-art understanding, and then we will hear from European and from colleagues from the EU what does it mean, and we will also look a little bit ahead what kind of actions have to be taken in the coming months, in the coming years, in order to really implement something on this subject.
Extended producer responsibility. It's an internationally applied policy principle which essentially shifts the responsibility for end-of-life management onto the shoulders of producers, right? And in that sense, it actually makes contributions to downstream and upstream waste management and design for environment, so to speak. Internationally applied, we see these are numbers from 2015, around 380 EPR schemes being implemented, and interestingly, also the Indian government, as you've all heard now, has implemented EPR as a key policy principle as part of the e-waste management rules and plastic waste management rules in 2016. If you look at the global adoption of EPR schemes for packaging and e-waste, this has been a dominant driver for waste management industries around the world. We actually kind of tried to develop a more comprehensive view of the waste management flows and also generally the material flows in the packaging and plastic sector. And what we realized when looking at statistics and interviewing experts, kind of looking at the official numbers that are out there, is that we have a lot of data gaps. So looking at these numbers, people are always very interested in numbers, but I think we should be very careful in interpreting them, especially at the end of life. There's large inconsistencies. Actually, during the last couple of days now, I've heard about the recycling rate of plastic in India. I've heard 30% recycling rate, I've heard 50% recycling rate, I've heard 70%. What number is really true, I don't really know, to be honest. We have to be very careful when looking at them.
You would see that the refillable glass was contributing almost 43%, and plastic, which was largely through PET, was emerging as a very strong option, because in the urban centers, we saw consumerism moving towards convenience. They were willing to pay that additional price, and takeaways became a big demand for consumer product companies, and that existed for the other categories much more than what it was for beverages. But this was the situation that we had in 2007.
How the current status in India in terms of EPR is, as you know, e-waste varies from products that have a life of a year to maybe 10 to 15 years. And not only that, they are as small as your palm to as large as a room. So definitely the complexities to manage such waste is extremely different than what plastic is. Well, in India right now, I think the progress, the way I see, is fairly good in terms of how producers are able to move towards compliance and managing waste. In fact, even before the rules ever came in, many of these producers have been managing waste in the country. So with their vast experience, other than India, they have been doing this for a pretty long time.
Right. You've heard a lot about informality, and I think we need to put this in perspective of what's actually been happening in this country, at least for the last, the informality for several decades, but the formal-informal interactions, at least for the last 15 years, right? So in electronic waste, the big challenge is that you're basically saying the waste is actually getting diverted from formal channels to informal. If you don't have the right kind of technology, you actually lose resources, whether it's in the informal sector or the formal sector. And I think this is where one really needs to take a very close look at how formal recyclers versus informal recyclers operate in this country. Does formal recycling actually lead to higher resource recovery in electronic waste especially? And if it does, then this entire diversion story is just a smokescreen.
Our mission is to help the PROs to succeed operationally in the in the take-back of electronic waste. What we see in the past 5 years, many countries in the world adopted EPR legislation to regulate the management of the e-waste. And this gave rise to a lot of new WE systems and PROs all over the world. EPR is a very important tool in the circular economy policy to shift from a linear economy to a more circular economy. Producer responsibility is even seen as a tool to speed up this transition. And for that reason, EPR legislation will be extended to more and more products. So it's not only packaging, batteries, end-of-life vehicles, or electronics, but also products like furniture and mattresses are getting EPR legislation.
We need to realize what are the characteristics of this recycling chain. It is as strong as its weakest link. So if collection is not happening efficiently, or if pre-processing is not happening efficiently, or if the end-refining is not happening efficiently, then we are losing on resource efficiency. Secondly, recycling chain is an interlinked series of specialized operations. And this specialization, or the importance of a specialization, increases towards we move further to the end of the recycling chain. Plastics, they have to go to certain outlets. Copper needs to go to secondary copper smelting. If we're talking about precious metals bearing materials, the complex ones, such as printed circuit boards, they should end up with the specialized precious metals refining capacities in order to optimize resource efficiency.